Renato today. Renato, I'm going to do a bit of your formal bio and then I reckon we just get right into it. So for those of you who don't know Renato, he has over 20 years experience in financial services with a strength in blending deep strategic insights and hands-on experience. He's the CEO of IOOF. And prior to being appointed as the CEO in June 2019, he held a number of senior executive roles within IOOF. In December 2018, he was appointed acting CEO, and prior to that was Group General Manager of Wealth Management. During this time, Renato was instrumental in leading IOOF through a series of forward-thinking strategic initiatives, including IOOF's advice-led strategy, the group's client-first transformation, and establishing the IOOF Advice Academy. Before joining IOOF, Renato worked for Rothschild and NAB, and a variety of other big name corporates as well. He's fluent in Portuguese, he's married, he has 2 daughters, he's loving homeschooling. Renato, enough of the formal bio. How are you?
I'm well, Alex, and thank you for that bio. It's the homeschooling was an interesting one you touched on. I will confess that on the first day of homeschooling that I made my eldest daughter cry twice. That's more a reflection of my homeschooling skills than her. But yeah, look, it's been a challenge, but as we've touched on already, that this presents opportunities. So it's a good time. It's a good time to be in financial services, and a credit to your organisation for everything you're doing to keep people connected.
Thanks, mate. And also welcome as a Diamond Partner IOOF. That's super exciting for us. And Renato, you're also one of our few good men. So for people looking for an advocate, this man is still available as an advocate for one of our members. So, you know, we've talked. We talk quite often, and, you know, in the lead up to this, we were talking about what it actually meant. You know, we don't talk about the crisis now. We're looking forward at the positives and the silver linings and all the things that businesses should be focusing on to move forward. Can you maybe just take us through what's the reality been like leading IOOF? You know, when this hit and lockdown happened, you know, how did you adapt to now the remote working, and not to mention all your clients and your advice network? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I, as many of you would know, we had our own challenges last year in 2019. So in some ways, that was a really good precursor to understand how the organisation and how us as individuals respond in a challenge and in the face of challenge. And in leading into the COVID-19 crisis, I was incredibly grateful that we put in those foundations over the last 12 or 18 months. And those foundations were in the form of building a purpose-driven organisation, having a very clear sense of what we wanted, what we believed in as an organisation, and for me personally, my own personal leadership style. I think we built a base of transparency, of strong communication and clarity around what we stood for. So going in, and to your point around how do we respond to the lockdown, we were actually there before the lockdown. So what I mean by that is that we approached this current crisis in a very proactive sense. So about a week or two before the state, and certainly Victoria and New South Wales, were in lockdown, we'd moved everyone to work from home. And initially that was on a voluntary basis. So it actually started with us testing our BCP. So we wanted to test our BCP with 50% of the workforce. So IOOF's got about 2,500 people. So on a Thursday, we thought, look, let's test the system, and we agreed that on the following Monday, we'd send half the people to work from home. On the Monday, we had over 1,000 people working from home. We thought we'd throw in the other half of the organisation on the Tuesday. So by Tuesday, we had 90% of people working from home. On the Wednesday, we were full work from home. So that responsiveness and that ability to adapt was only possible because of all the work we'd done leading up to that. So I think this crisis is a great stress test of businesses, of people as well, both in terms of their own style, but what's their dominant style, and how do they, you know, what are those traits that come to the fore in a crisis situation? So for IOOF, you know, what pleases me the most is that even leading up to the lockdown, there were varying degrees of comfort amongst our workforce around, you know, traveling on a train, coming into work, all those sort of public space challenges. We were in the fortunate position to give people a choice. You can come to work if you would like to, but equally we were happy for people to work from home. Obviously that changed when we went into lockdown, but all that work was incredibly valuable in setting ourselves up for what is now an environment where I'm incredibly proud of what we're delivering our clients. And we're running the business virtually and have done so successfully for probably up to 6 weeks now.
So what do you, I find it interesting, isn't it? So and obviously there's a lot of pre-work, as you said, that you've done to actually, so you were building the foundations already, and that's really tested it. I find it funny, you think about normal business. So without the crisis, how long do you think it would have taken you as a business to actually go from 0 to 100% workforce remotely?
Yeah.
What, 3 days, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. That's we've asked ourselves that question, and that's so they're the learning. So the issue for us, the opportunity is that, well, okay, what do you take out of this? We moved an entire organisation from probably 5 to 10% work from home to 100 in no more than 5 days. In a normal course of business, I'd say it's probably 5 months, 6 months. We would have set up a committee, we would have argued over communications, we would have done some very thorough planning. Not to say that those elements aren't of value, but we've successfully transitioned in 5 days. If someone in the normal course of business had suggested we do that, no one would have signed up to that. We would have thought that was idiotic. Mm-hmm. Now, is it really as idiotic as it sounds? It's actually not. So I think it raises a couple of issues. One is, how do you build an organization that can respond? Because that value is, and again, we could not have predicted the pandemic. We could not have predicted what day it was going to go into lockdown, but we need to build organizations that can respond. The second piece is, what do we take out of how we've responded in a crisis and take that go forward in a more normal environment? So the one learning from me is that let's never put ourselves in a position where it takes us 5 months to do this. So, okay, maybe you take a bit longer than 5 days, but maybe you do it in 4 weeks. So what are those levers? What are those things that are going to unpick that? My reflections on that question, and I've asked everyone to think about it, but certainly my own personal reflections, it's actually about attitude and behaviours. If you've got, the only reason we were able to do it was collaboration. We had an absolute clarity on what mattered, what was important. And my observation of that period is that there are a lot of solutions being arrived at and implemented well before going to a steering committee. There was, we had our crisis management team in place, but by the time the problem was getting to the crisis management committee, it had already been solved. So that to me is a form of empowerment. How do you empower your workforce to understand what matters, understand who has what piece of knowledge and ability, and then get them to work together?
So practically, and I couldn't agree more, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because all the things you've said, the sky hasn't fallen in terms of everything that you've managed to do. How do we remember this when things, and I think probably we'd all agree that whatever normal looks like, it's going to be, like, I personally believe that the shape of how we work is going to be completely different in many ways. So how do we avoid that pull of, once we can go back to offices and connect and the steering committees can happen again, how do you reckon we avoid falling back into that kind of comfortable zone that's familiar?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think the answer is, that to me is all about leadership. So, you need to focus on what matters. So I think we need to redefine what matters. So, again, if I take the crisis example, is what matters having a very thorough BCP, business continuity plan, or is what matters making sure you've got the right culture, the right conversations, the right measures to be able to adapt and react as things change? So I think from an IOOF perspective, a lot of that comes back to the culture we're looking to create, which is very much about empowerment, understanding what matters, not relying on hierarchy, being a very collaborative culture and a very transparent culture. One of the things that we'd worked pretty heavily on prior to the crisis, but I think has come to the fore in the moment, is creating transparency amongst everyone. So my view is that if there's information in one part of the business, our job as leaders is to get that information across the whole business, because the more you share information, the more valuable it becomes. And in that context, I run weekly webinars, which is across the whole organisation. We have a conversation. A lot of that conversation is not about trying to solve problems. It's actually about just sharing context, sharing concerns, sharing opportunities, sharing shout outs, acknowledging when things are going really well and celebrating those small successes. So certainly I think, and people throw the term agile out there, and I think we've destroyed that word. But building a culture that can respond is far more important than building a culture that can follow processes incredibly thoroughly. Because, as I said, no one could have predicted the source of this crisis. We could have predicted a crisis. They're called business cycles, but no one could have predicted the source of it. Therefore, it's very difficult to document the response to something you can't predict.
Mm-hmm. And so to that point, it's the readiness for, look, who knows what's coming, but it's the things that you're saying. It's about the ability to fail, and have that as part of the learning experience. It's resilience, it's attitude, it's having the right skills in place. I think, we've been in financial services a long time, and so is our amazing community. And it's very easy, I think, because financial services and banking and wealth, it is traditional, it's conservative, where we're looking after people's money. It's not some, fly-by-night thing. And I think that's all true. But it's also always been used, I feel, as a way why we can't move faster, why we have to do things in these really hierarchical ways. And I think what you're really highlighting is that there are different ways to still have that balance. Do you think with your chats with your staff, I mean, you're now getting upwards of 1,000 of your people on your calls. Do you think, we were talking before about the potential, the silver linings, and I really like to focus on this because it is an awful situation, but I think there are silver linings. Do you think in a way you're connecting and communicating more with your staff and your clients and your community than you were before?
Oh, there's no question. And it's not only the frequency, it's also the quality of the communication. They're more human conversations. I mean, I don't think anyone will be, offended if my daughter rocks in, and actually in one of those webinars, actually she came in and had a chat. I mean, the reality is we're all going through this same situation at the same time. And yes, it is having a dramatic impact on parts of our society. I think in financial services, as a general comment, I think we're fortunate to be working in part of the economic system that actually is still generating revenues, and that means we can continue to look after our staff and we can continue to look after our clients, and we should never forget that. So we're fortunate, but let's do it together. And there's more human conversations. I mean, I've catch up with my executive team, which obviously is remote now, but I have people on my team I've worked with for 5, 6, 7 years. And it's only in the last 3 or 4 weeks have I realised they're a cat person, right? And because you see a cat in the background. I mean, you're learning more human elements of ourselves, our teams, and I think we can only be better for it. So one of the challenges, okay, how do you take that humanistic approach to building internal relationships back into the real world? And we have a saying within our operations team that, we're real people talking to real people. Our clients are real people, and so are we. And I think the one reflection is I think there's probably been a tendency to park our personalities at the door when we come to work. I think we're better organisations if you bring our whole self to work, the good, the bad, the ugly. I think that may actually help us be more creative as an industry as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because we're it's not even tolerance, we're accepting, we're interested. I've met more pets across this Brady Bunch screen that I see now every day. You get to know people, and you're right. How do we keep that? And thank you all for your questions. So I've got some good questions coming up. Before we go to those, I'd love to chat to you about balance and this human, because you're the human as well. And we've had lots of feedback from our members in these communities, and there's different challenges. How do I lead my team remotely? How is, is there too much communication? How do I still keep people balanced on a result whilst being an empathetic leader? So there's all, and people are asking these questions both from being a team member and a leader. And the other thing that we're finding as well is that there's this real challenge, I think, for some of us around how do I balance my day? How do I still look after my energy? A lot of our members are working ridiculous hours, 15-hour plus days. Now, you're the CEO of a big listed organisation with a whole heap of stuff going on. Now, how are you doing that? Because I know that this is something really important to you to keep that balance, your fitness, your energy. How are you putting boundaries in your day and making sure that you're looking after that and not being on call 20 hours a day?
Yeah, it's taken a bit of work. I think it's taken me 5 weeks to get something that I think is sustainable. And so a good example is I took for granted how important my commute, my drive into work every day was. So that was my space where I decompressed and sort of got set for the day in the morning. I decompressed in the evening. When you remove that, I was going from the study straight to the dining room table, and it just wasn't in the right frame of mind at all. So I think structure is important, and certainly for me, structure has been important. That means my day now starts with a run. So I think that can be different for different people. I'm currently in my study, working in the study. So when I finish, I close the door. I know for other people in our business, they'll put a towel, they might be working on the dining room table, but they'll put the towel over the laptop. And that for them is that symbolism that, look, that's off now. I'm now at home. Those boundaries are really important. One of the positives to come out of all this is that, and again, I think I consider myself to be really fortunate through time. I'm actually spending time with my daughters that I wouldn't normally have spent. So I've seen them. I know what they do on holidays now, which is terrifying, but nonetheless, I know what they do on holidays. So it actually, if I'm looking at the positives, it does give you insights into different aspects of home life that I think if you're working 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you may not normally have. But it is, to your point, it's incredibly important you find boundaries. That's going to be different things to different people. And one of the techniques I use is set myself targets. And I did this even before crisis. So I had a target about how many kilometers I'd want to run every week, how many times I want to be at home for dinner. They might sound a bit simplistic, but I'm a very goals-oriented person. So if I set myself a target, it is at the front of my mind, and the right behaviours will follow to ensure that I achieve that balance. It's no different in the current environment. They're just different targets now, and there's a different structure.
Yeah, and you're right, it's different for everyone, but it's so important because we're hearing a lot of people say, oh, I feel guilty. And guys, we need structure, routine, whatever works for you. We've had a lot of sessions on breathing and exercise and time blocking and lots of great tips. So it is important. I think related to that, I mean, how you talked earlier about this has really, a crisis, whatever it is, it forces you to focus on what's important. Because suddenly everything that's kind of the fluff or doesn't really matter, it strips away because you don't have that luxury. For you and the business, what have you really found that was the immediate, wow, this has happened and here's the focus?
Number one, 2 and 3. So when it all hit the fan, look after your people. That's all we needed to do, which was actually, in some ways, it is actually quite liberating because it's crystal clear what you need to do. We needed to look after our people. If we look after our people, they'll look after our clients. And that was, I'd say, probably the first. Obviously, as this has gone on and continues to go on, you then start to think about other elements of your business, balance sheet, financials, how do we work out, how do we roll out of this? We were fortunate that we had a very, very robust technology environment. So that was, we knew that going in. I mean, even at the peak, I think in terms of sort of system capacity, we're at 20 or 30%. So that was one thing we didn't have to worry about. In the normal course, I know other businesses have had to focus on that. But the number one is people. I mean, our clients are people. The people who deliver value to our clients are people. If you don't have a good sense and a good environment to work in, everything else becomes much more difficult.
Yeah, in a way, it makes the decisions easier, doesn't it? Yeah. Because you are focusing on what is going to make the difference. It's that whole 80-20. So I think for a lot of us on this call that are really juggling with more work than ever, I think this is such a great reminder. What's the filter? What's really important? What's the thing? Because you can't have 20 priorities. It just, doesn't work pre-COVID, and it certainly doesn't work now. So you've obviously got a massive advice community. How are your advisors going? And I know quite a few of them are on today, but how are they doing, and how are you supporting them as they support their clients with everything that's happening?
Yeah, look, the advisors, and I'll again, one of the disciplines I've got into during COVID is actually just to draw up a list of advisors and just speak to advisors and contact them to understand firsthand how they're going. I would say they're in their element. I mean, and Alex, advisors really well. They are about helping people. They want to give back. They want to help people. And there's never been a greater need for help. So in some ways, they are absolutely in their element. What I worry about it, and some of the conversations we have with them is, okay, that's fine, but you need to look after yourself as well. So as an advisor, how do you make sure you're looking after yourself so you can continue to be there and helping your clients? Now, that may mean how you're structuring your business, how are you using technology, how are you looking after your own mental welfare, how are you balancing your home, your time, your work. So there's a lot of that that's going on behind the scenes. There are some real green shoots that have come out of all this. I think advisors as a whole have come to realize that their clients are okay with technology. Actually, their clients are very happy to do a review over a webcast, for example. So they're thinking about, okay, well, how does this change how I run my business when we return to normal? I know our practice managers, for example, or auditors are doing a lot of their interactions online. We're finding that a lot of that travel time disappears. So there's extra capacity. Now, I think there's a pros and cons to that. I think working remotely is less efficient potentially, but equally there are other efficiencies that come with it. So as I said, as we move into the new normal, the challenge is to figure out, okay, which pieces of this little microcosm do we take, and which pieces do we revert back to traditional ways? Mm-hmm. In terms of helping them, technology has been a big part of that. So we've worked hard to make sure that they have the technologies they need to run their business. A good example of that is that we've rolled out free of charge DocuSign to all our advisors, so they can get their clients to be executing documentation more easily. We're currently working on a program to support advisors' pro bono effort, so assisting and supporting advisors financially in helping them provide advice, particularly to those that can't or aren't already in an ongoing relationship or frankly can't afford advice. A lot of our thinking at IOOF at the moment is how do we help the 80% of people that are in dire need of advice and frankly just don't have access to it. And that's something that, whilst it's been the back of our minds for quite a while, it's really come to the front of the queue. So in terms of thinking about how has this crisis changed how you think, that's probably a great element or a great example of going, you know what, we need to double down on finding solutions for the people that really need help but currently can't get access to it.
Yeah, so, and I mean, I know that's a lot of that was your focus before this happened, and it's just really, I guess it's amplifying how you speed that up. Yep. And it's the small things, isn't it? Like DocuSign, it's those things where you go, God, I don't have a printer. This doesn't work. Like, how can we practically make a difference? We've got a few questions. If you're happy to get a few questions, April, are you happy to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm April from IRES, and my one question is, as a leader, I just wanted to know what you're doing or what you've got in place to make your staff feel supported mentally and professionally.
Yeah, it's a good question. So a lot of that revolves around generally communication or access to knowledge. So we've actually, there would be, I wouldn't say a webinar a day, but there'd be certainly a webinar every other day. Now that could be on mental wellbeing. We had one yesterday around just sharing ideas around supporting homeschooling. So, what are some of the issues around homeschooling? We've had a virtual yoga class, fitness, and it's about keeping those lines of communication open in different ways. We're also running a pulse survey, which we run I think it's a 5 to 10 question survey to get a sense of how people are feeling. On the whole, I think people are dealing with it exceptionally well. The piece that myself and the executive team really are really focused on are the tails, if you like, or the exceptions. Those people that might be feeling isolated, that aren't reaching out, is how do we identify that? And the call out that we've made there on that front is really that's everyone's responsibility. That's every manager, every person. One of the things that we're promoting, and then I myself do, I'll just pick up the phone and randomly call someone and just have a chat. I think people were a little bit maybe caught unawares initially, but that's just about reaching out to people. And we have a saying that if you're not hearing from someone or you haven't heard from someone for a while, it's probably a good case to suggest that probably worth reaching out the other way. But it's around that communication, but making it modular and topical. So, we've had a lot, and particularly initially around the use of technology. So, some of the tips and traps around Zoom or using Teams. As I said, we've had work from home, a lot around wellbeing, mental wellbeing, fitness. The one piece, and actually we've got, so this Friday, we've got a DJ session on Friday afternoon. It is important to have a bit of fun here. I mean, we are people, It can be stressful. Let's just have a bit of fun. And I think laughter is a remedy of many, many ills. So it's just trying to live a balanced society and trying to help contribute towards a balanced society virtually, really.
So much gold in there, and it won't surprise you that, and thank you, April, for asking that. It's such a recurring theme, because we're covering what we feel like we're stuck at home and getting in each other's way, but what about the people who are by themselves that don't even have a cat or a dog or a pet? How do you know if someone's not responding? Like all those things you're talking about, they're such simple things, but just picking up the phone and having a quick chat. We've heard a lot about, similar to what you're doing. So I'm looking forward to my invitation to the DJ session, by the way. We haven't done that. That's a new frontier for us, Cam. We haven't got a DJ session.
It's written down. Don't worry. We're stealing that idea.
Now, thank you. But they're so important, you're right, because we're hearing a lot from a lot of different leaders about, as you're saying, have really clear purpose for the meeting. So like, this is a meeting around goals and focusing, but then others have had campfire chats, others have got an Ask Me Anything session, others are doing crazy shirts and whatever and quizzes. So I think it's really important to have all of those things happening. I'm going to ask a question for Claudette, who won't mind me sharing. She said, I can't ask the question myself, I'm multitasking and homeschooling. Yes, I'm sure many people completely resonate with that. So Renato, Claudette's just saying, that the pandemic has highlighted even further the importance of working on a business rather than just in a business. How can an employee make a case to superiors to work on planning for the hit by a bus scenario when the business is usually focused on BAU? So it's that balance of, focusing on the tactical, reactive, and actually planning for things like this. What's your insight there?
That's a really tough thing, and it's a really good question. So if I think about what we've done, and a lot of it, I try to distill a lot of those key drivers of success to simple things. And for us at IOOF, that's purpose, being really clear on purpose, culture, behaviours, and strategy is probably the other one. If I reflect on purpose and cultural behaviours, what we've tried to do is, rather than think of working on the business separately to the in, is actually incorporate. So as you're doing the work, how do you reinforce the right behaviours, the right conversations around purpose? So a good example of that I hear quite a lot in the business is, if someone goes to their superior, their manager, with a problem, I'll hear a lot of times the way the superior responds to that is going, okay, well, how does your purpose guide you? So if you think about it in the context of your purpose, how does that help you? So some of that's reframing. So reframe in a way that actually links to some of those on the business and bigger issues, rather than thinking of, I think the challenge is sometimes we think about the decisions in a very narrow lens, broaden the lens, broaden the conversation. So rather than thinking of the working on the business as a separate task to be done, try and incorporate that into the everyday and here and now. So, and I think that's probably been the one, I wouldn't call it secret to success, but certainly the one thing that's helped us in the last 3 or 4 years is incorporating the working on the business into those everyday actions, not having it as another fifth pillar that you're then trying to roll in to the business.
Yeah, I think it's really wise advice, because this is the reality of business and being a leader. And like you said, really, this is a business cycle. But you've got to balance the tactical and doing the do with also always looking. And I know, Renato, you talk a lot about, the skill and ability of future thinking, looking to that future, thinking ahead, what's the purpose, bringing it back and doing, you've got to do them both at the same time. I think that's absolutely right. Tracy Sofra, are you there? And can you put your microphone on and ask your question? So for those of you who weren't here yesterday, Tracy's mic didn't come on, so I literally had to make small talk like a live news reporter for 5 minutes. I hope you were all entertained by that.
Having flashbacks right now, actually.
So I'm going to have a list of jokes for next time that happens. Tracy, can we hear you? You there?
It's working.
Yes, we can hear you, Trace.
That's good. How is everyone?
Good. What was your question for Renato?
How are you, Renato?
Good, Tracy. How are you?
Good. You remember me?
I do remember you.
There's a bit of a joke between me and Renato, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention that, so I will leave that.
What's that?
I wasn't going to mention it.
Best not to. Where do you see the financial services industry in the next 2 to 5 years? I mean, you know, roundabout.
Yeah.
And how do you, in particular, how do you see the role of dealer groups and advisors seeking their own license? Like, what do you see happening in that space, given so many changes? You know, we had the Royal Commission, and then so we've got this happening, and there's so much uncertainty, I guess. What do you see as a visionary when you look ahead? What do you see?
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I'll give you the short answer because this is a topic close to my heart, and I could talk for hours about it. But if I, you know, the crisis is actually creating a real checkpoint between the narrative that has been happening in the last 3 or 4 years. And if you use the Royal Commission, for example, I think there was a lot of perspective that came out of the Royal Commission. It was a narrow perspective, a very narrow lens around advice. The crisis that we're facing now, the need for advice, is providing a very, very different lens to the role of advice, the role of advisors, what we do, and the value that's attributed to what we do. So I think if you put the two together, you actually probably get a far more complete picture. You know, I'm an optimist, but generally speaking, if we ever doubted the importance of advice, we're now living why it's important, why it matters. You would be having conversations every day that are changing people's lives. That's why advice matters. You've touched on a point around licensees and structure that is important. The structure, again, these are generalizations, but the dealer group structure that we've traditionally known is broken. It's fundamentally flawed. If you go back to the origins of that structure, even the reason why we call them dealer groups, the dealer groups are called dealer groups because this is pre-FSRA. People used to have dealers licenses. There were no AFSLs. And when you get lots of dealers together, you have a dealer group. And what they did, they went to product providers and extracted margin in supporting their products in exchange for effectively a sales channel. That model's continued to today. So 20 or 30 years later, we still talk about dealer groups. I prefer to think of it as licensees. Licensees have a very high fiduciary obligation to put their clients first and foremost. They cannot put themselves in a position of conflict, i.e. by in any way being subsidized by product. That's the go forward model. So whether it's self-licensed, whether it's institutional, whether it's a mid-tier, I'm a firm believer that the model of the future is having licensees that are adding value to advisors, making them more efficient, more effective, more relevant to their clients, being rewarded for those services in a way that allows them to provide them, i.e. at a minimum, be breaking even. I think having licensees attached to product providers, so for example, in an IOOF context, is not a conflict as long as it is clear margin where, and there is no cross-subsidisation. So in our world, as we're working very hard to ensure that there is no cross-subsidisation, that our advice business stands on its own feet. But there is, as a product, if I put my product manufacturer hat on now, there is value by having a close relationship with advisors. We get a much better understanding of the implications our decisions in the product world have on the outcome to members. So that knowledge sharing, I think, is invaluable. So I suppose the 2 to 5 year horizon, I don't think there's a better time to be in advice. And I think the businesses that come out of this will be far better businesses. And I actually think the advice industry will be in a real purple patch where we've got increased relevance, we've got better businesses because we've been forced to build better businesses. And from an IOOF perspective, we want to beat the drum. We want to stand up there and actually advocate for advice because we think it's incredibly valuable.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Trace. Thank you. And yeah, couldn't agree more, Renato. That could be that's a whole nother session, that one. But I think you're right. And this just comes back to, you know, what you talk about future thinking and you know, what's our purpose and where do we want to be when we come out of this? Like what do we want to be known for and really emerge as leaders, I think is a really powerful message there. As always, everyone, it is 12:47, time evaporates. Maybe it's just for me, I'm not sure, but it evaporates for me. Ren, thank you so much for your time today. It's great to have you here and to share your wisdom. Is there a couple of things that you want to leave the crew with today, a couple of words of advice, tips?
There's probably two. One is smile. Look, let's make the most of the environment, the opportunities. As I said, I've had a couple of opportunities to be challenged, and you know, never let a crisis go to waste is one. But the only tip I'd leave people is have courage, and the courage is to do the right thing. In this sort of environments, the one thing I've certainly come to realise, you won't always have the information you need to make a fully informed decision. So you've just got to do the right thing and deal with the consequences later. And I think if we do that over and over, we may make some mistakes, and I think we will make mistakes. But if they're well intended and it's because we're trying to do the right thing, then everything else you can fix in time.